Here's a sample of what you'll hear on this episode of Holistic Health Matters.
I stopped calling myself bulimic simply because I recognized that the identity, my soul, my spirit was not bulimic. My actions were. So separating the actions that you're doing from your identity is first and foremost. The results that you get, because so often we'll easily tie our results to our identity. So success is a big one, especially for men that I've worked with, where they've had unsuccessful results and thus they define themselves as not a success.
Welcome to the Holistic Health Matters podcast, where it's all about maximizing your health potential by aligning your life more fully with God's design for spirit, mind, and body. I'm your host, David Sandstrom, naturopathic doctor and biblical health coach, and this is episode number 30. This episode is brought to you by Sauna Space. If you're serious about your health and well-being, then you should consider detoxifying your body effortlessly and naturally with a Sauna Space home sauna. To learn more, go to my website, davidsandstrom.com/resources, and click on the Sauna Space logo and start enjoying all the health benefits of a Sauna Space Zero EMF near-infrared home sauna today. Today we have with us Kimberly Spencer. Kimberly is an award-winning high-performance coach and trainer, Amazon best-selling co-author, and founder of crownyourself.com. Kimberly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a very busy person. You're into a lot of different things. My audience is into holistic health, which means health in spirit, mind, and body. And I know you talk a lot about our processing emotions, which would come under the heading of our mental emotional state, also the spiritual condition. You're really in the personal development space, which I consider myself as well. So when you're into holistic health, it kind of goes beyond just simple health and wellness. You cross the line over into personal development, which I think you're really firmly in that space as well. Is that correct?
Very much so, yeah. The easiest and simplest health book could be written to eat less, exercise more, eat healthy, and there you go.
Right. We've all heard that before.
We've all heard that. Why is it that there are so many health books? Why is it that health is something that we're struggling with? It goes beyond just diet and exercise and do some meditation. It is about the holistic being. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and what I see is this perception of compartmentalization, of this perception of, well, my spirituality is this, and then my relationships are in this box, and then my business is in this box, and they don't touch each other. And I'm like, the problem with that thinking is that you are the common denominator in each one of those boxes. And if you're trying to put each thing into its own little box and have it be separate from something else, one, it creates separateness and division in your mind. And second of all, it's not bringing your full authentic self to any of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's my contention that we are spirit, we have a mind, and we live in a body.
Yes.
So all three parts of the human condition are interconnected, but they're also interdependent, which means what affects one part of our being will, by necessity, alter the others for good or bad.
Exactly. And the ability to be able to discern what is it that really needs to be addressed. Is it an emotional thing, which I've found that as I've done more and more work in high performance coaching, and as I've been coaching leaders for the past 4 years, I've found that IQ has always been prized, but EQ is something that we're still learning. We're still understanding.
Yes.
And our own emotional intelligence, our own ability to process emotions. So many of adults don't know how to healthily process emotions. We've been taught to either suppress or repress or escape from them. And that was what I was taught growing up. What I was taught, I grew up, my parents, I saw my dad as an addict, and he would escape from his emotions. He would escape from his feelings of shame and his guilt and his past trauma. My mom was, on the other hand, she would suppress and repress them. She didn't want to feel big feelings because they scared her, because she actually feels really, really deeply. And I've seen that with a lot of people, is that they have a an experience that breaks their heart or that opens them up or that hurts them. And so they shut down rather than continue to open up. And
yes.
that ability to open up to the full width and breadth of the human emotional experience that we can have is huge, because scientifically measured, a feeling lasts for 90 seconds. We just, more often than not, what I have seen is most often people, when they feel a feeling initially, it scares them because they haven't been taught how to process them or how to deal with them. And so they either repress it and suppress it and stack on like anger that they're feeling that way, guilt that they have that feeling, shame that they ever could even think to have that feeling, fear of continuing to feel that thing. And so they stack it on like a Jenga set. So what could have just been a 90-second full emotional experience to just allow yourself to release it, I think of feelings and emotions kind of like a wave. So the tide doesn't stay in, but if you dam it up, then you're in for some catastrophe if you're damming up the ocean. So good luck.
I think that's a really good metaphor, Kimberly. One of the things I found in my practice when I was talking with people about emotional issues is we all do this. We tend to get emotionally constipated. We hang on to these things longer than we should be. Emotions are meant to be felt. We should experience it. And in fact, I was listening to your interview with Mike Cameron on your episode 111, Redefining Badass.
Yeah, he's great.
He said, so he was a great guy. And he said something that really caught my attention. He said that instead of just getting down on ourselves about feeling that way, we should look at it as being more curious about it and analyze that feeling and say, what is this feeling telling me right now? What can I learn from this? And I believe when we do that, we can process that emotion, get out of it what we are supposed to be getting out of it, and then let it go. And that's the way emotions are made, and then we process them in a healthy way.
And I love the word curiosity, because it's something that I feel that is constricted with these labels of morality. So the label of this is a bad feeling and this is a good feeling, like, oh, feeling happy is good. So then that can lead you into some toxic positivity where you're just constantly putting on a happy face when meanwhile you're silently suffering versus, but you're doing the quote unquote, what you've been taught was a good emotion versus a bad emotion that's like anger. Like for me, I was taught that my rage was bad and that it was something that needed to be shamed. Now looking back on it, I'm like, well, what was my rage really about? Well, my rage was really about, as a child, was really about hypocrisy. Rage is actually, it's a very good sign. It's a powerful emotion that signals passion. That signals that there's something that's either out of whack or something that you're incredibly passionate about or something that directly conflicts with a value. So a rage, anger, sadness can give you really powerful signals as to certain meanings that certain things have in your life.
Absolutely. I want to just add to that anger is fine, but when it comes to rage, if your rage has reached the point where you're contemplating physical harm to another person, it's time to get some professional help. And I would also add that those emotions, at the moment, they may not feel the greatest, but if we process them well, they can help motivate us towards some really productive change.
They can motivate us definitely away from things that we don't want. So the thing is that that's a good form of motivation for the short term. But the problem is that I see a lot of people get stuck in that form of motivation, which is moving away from something that they don't want. And there's only so long that you can drive forward toward a destination while looking in the rearview mirror.
Interesting. Speak more to that.
Well, that's where faith comes in, is eventually you can drive away, you can move away from something that you don't want. But ultimately, if you're still focusing on that thing that you don't want, that thing that you don't want is still driving you. So say, for example, you have somebody who doesn't believe that they're enough. right? So that's a very common belief that that I run up against, and that we all have to different degrees. So somebody doesn't believe that they're enough, and so they don't believe that they're enough, so they don't try, and then they fail at their job, and then they say, well, it's because I'm not enough, and then they go into drinking and they go into drugs and they go down that path. So that's one form of they just chose not to have it motivate them.
Yes.
Then there's the other form where they say, well, I'm going to prove to you how much enough I am. And let me just maybe do all these things and achieve all these things and do all these things so that maybe then I feel enough. Well, that's still being motivated by not being enough.
Yeah.
So it's still a driving. So there's only so far you can drive while looking in the rearview mirror. And some people become very, very successful driving forward while looking in the rearview mirror at fear and all the things that they don't want. Mm-hmm. But a more sustainable, long-lasting strategy for staying motivated is faith and vision. It's being able to turn your focus forward, just like you would on a road, and drive forward towards your destination. Where you're able to just occasionally check the rearview mirror for, you see a siren or you see something that you're like, oh, I might want to keep an eye out, but you're not constantly looking in that rearview mirror expecting to move forward. You're driving forward toward a destination where you're looking out the front window as to where you're going.
I think that's an excellent metaphor. I love that. Did you have something else more to say on that? Because I've got a comment.
Oh, please comment away.
Well, I'm a naturopathic doctor and a health coach, but I'm also a full-time airline pilot. I've been flying jet airliners for the last 30 years. And a lot of people, the way that metaphor you use is instead of looking in the rearview mirror, being pushed by those negative feelings, allow yourself to be pulled by looking in the right direction through the windshield, and you'll be far more productive. Well, as an airline pilot, I understand aerodynamics, and most people believe that the lift is created underneath the wing, and that's what keeps the plane in the air. But it's not. The wind underneath doesn't push the plane up. It's the wind going over the top of the wing that kind of like a vacuum sucks the plane into the air. And it's far more effective than trying to pack enough air underneath the wing, if that makes sense. Yeah. So what you're describing is like the airplane gets lifted into the air. We can be lifted to a higher level of living if we're following the right motivation.
Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Yeah, that totally makes sense. One of my clients just fulfilled his childhood dream and bought a plane. So I've learned a lot about, that was a goal that he had joked about when we first started working together. And I said, well, challenge accepted. So I learned a bit about aviation, and I think flight, it's definitely something that is on my list to learn, because there are so many beautiful metaphors attached to flying, and just from the physics of it alone, of being able to take flight, and also, being able to check your instruments and check your tools to make sure that you're staying on track and on course.
Well, I like to say we have an office with a view. We got a view that's pretty magnificent at times that most people don't get to see.
That's amazing. That's so amazing.
I got another question for you, Kimberly. I know you work a lot with moms, and there are people that I've heard this, that, well, it's a little selfish to be spending all that time at the gym and spending all that time shopping and preparing food because, there's people that need me. My kids need me. My husband needs me. What would you say to that person who's feeling a little guilty about, taking a little me time?
Yeah. So first of all, let's examine the word selfish. I get really nerdy about certain words, and selfish is one of them. And the word selfish, if you actually look at it if you break it down, self, that's of the self, and ish. Ish is just a suffix that means characteristics of the self. So it's not that it's a good or a bad thing. Selfishness is not good or bad. It's just being yourself. So how can you be your best self? And then if we were to look at the word that is normally more praised, being selfless, that is actually the suffix less means less than yourself. So you're not actually fully being all of your highest and best self when you are actually being selfless. You can actually be your highest and best self when you are choosing to lean into being more selfish, but also of service. Like there, and that's where I think that there is a paradox. I don't think that it's a one or the other thing. I think that you can't, that I know that if I go to the gym in the morning, to give you just a personal example, I can wake up earlier. And while as much as I would love to go snuggle with my toddler, who is so cute right now, that as much as I would love to do that, at the same time, I know that I am much more mentally and physically present for him if I go take that hour out at the gym. I become a much higher and better version of myself to be able to serve at a much higher and better level. So as much as I could be selfless and take that time and put him first and get all his needs met first, instead, I choose to be selfish because I know that if I'm striving for my highest and best self, and a characteristic of myself is being of service, then I am of much better service to my son and to my husband by going to the gym, by taking care of myself first, so that the body and my physiology and my presence and my biochemistry is thriving from those endorphins of 45 minutes on the elliptical. And then I can come back and be so much more present for my son and my husband.
Absolutely. Amen. That is such a good word. You know, I like to put it this way, is we can only give out of our abundance. And if we want to give the best that we can, the best part of us, we have to be filled ourselves. Kind of like a reservoir is filled up by the river. And when the lake gets up to the top, the water will spill over and give its water, but not be depleted itself because the stream is continuing to fill the reservoir. In the same way, when we fill ourselves up with health and wellness, when we have more energy than the minimum required to get through the day, we're more patient, we're more kind, we're more giving and loving. We become better servants when we've taken care of ourselves first. With
the reservoir, I love what you said of that you cannot give, like truly give.
Yes.
Unless it's out of abundance. Because otherwise, if you're giving, it's out of scarcity, which ultimately scarcity comes from fear. By operating from that scarcity or that fear, then eventually you're pouring so much out of you that there is nothing left. And for me, I know that as provider for my family, as a mom, as a wife, as a servant in essence to my clients, I need to be giving from that space where I am filled, and not it's to where that it's actually, I think of myself, I would be thinking of myself less if I didn't. I would be acting selfless. I would be actually acting in less than myself if I were not taking care of my body, if I were not taking that extra time to honor myself or to care for myself or to care for my health.
Yeah, very good. What if I told you there was a pill that if you take it 5 times a week, you could lower your risk of dying from any cause by 40%? This pill has also been proven to enhance immune function, detox your body from heavy metals and environmental toxins, enhance your mood, relax your muscles, reduce pain, bring on better sleep, and has virtually no side effects. If this pill existed, would you want to get your hands on it? Well, this treatment does exist, but it's not a pill. It's called sauna therapy. God's design is always best. Being outdoors and getting sunlight on your skin on a regular basis is remarkably health enhancing. But most of us don't live in tropical climates, and we can't always get outdoors. So the next best thing is having an infrared sauna at your house. Far infrared saunas have been used successfully for years. However, please understand this. Far infrared saunas have a dirty little secret. Most of them emit high amounts of EMF, or electromagnetic frequencies. These EMFs stress our bodies and reduce the effectiveness of sauna bathing. So I encourage everyone listening to go to my recommended resources page at davidsandstrom.com/resources and learn more about my friends over at SaunaSpace. SaunaSpace produces the highest quality, zero EMF, near-infrared saunas on the market today, bar none. I love my SaunaSpace sauna. I use it several times a week. I've had a far infrared sauna for many years, and I did enjoy it. But after upgrading my old sauna with SaunaSpace's new technology, zero EMF near-infrared bulbs, I'll never go back to using that high EMF technology again. To learn more, go to my website, davidsandstrom.com/resources. That's DAVIDSANDSTROM.com/resources. And click on the SaunaSpace logo and start enjoying all the extraordinary health benefits of owning your own near-infrared, zero EMF home sauna today. Now let's get back to the show. Well, that kind of leads me right into the other question I wanted to ask you about, which is that type of thinking is motivated by false beliefs. So how do we identify limiting beliefs, and then what do we do about them to correct them?
Well, every belief that we have, a belief is just a thought that we've thought on repeat. And at some point, we adopted certain beliefs to survive. But there's two types of beliefs. There's one that is a belief of causality, meaning it's an if-then belief. So this belief will show up in circumstances like, if I get certified in this, then I will be able to charge more. Or if I get 10 clients, then I can do this thing. If I can, if I eat this ice cream, then I'll gain 5 pounds in the morning. Like those are all beliefs of causality. Then on the other hand, we have beliefs of meaning, where we have certain meaning, where we attach a certain meaning to a thing that happens or a thing just period. So when you give that thing meaning, for example, when you give the rage the meaning that it's bad, then what happens when you feel that emotion? What happens when, suddenly, does that mean that I'm bad? Does that mean that I'm a bad person for feeling this emotion?
That's a slippery slope, isn't it?
It's a slippery slope to slide down. Exactly. So really allowing yourself to question, when did I choose to believe that? Because ultimately there was a moment where consciously or unconsciously, we chose to believe that thing. So if everything is a belief, if everything you believe is a thought that you think on repeat, I like to think of beliefs like wardrobe. Like, we know with fashion, there are some beliefs that serve us. There are some forms of fashion that look really good on us. And then there are some forms of fashion that go out of style quite quickly. Yes. But it depends. So sometimes there's that, old sweater that we've been wearing for years that has holes in it that doesn't really, it looks kind of frumpy. It's maybe a little tattered, but it's so comfortable to be in that old sweater. Mm-hmm. Yet you aren't going to wear that old sweater to the job interview. You're not going to wear that old sweater to the date that maybe with that guy that's really, really handsome, that's of quite a viable possibility for a long-term relationship. Mm-hmm. And yet that's what so many of us do with our beliefs. We'll carry this belief into other circumstances. A belief that was formed maybe with one person or maybe with one experience will create a meaning around it and then create a belief around it that will then take into other experiences, to where we constantly then cause ourselves to recreate our past rather than creating a new future.
Absolutely.
So I always say start with questioning your beliefs. I mean, for example, I had one client. She was really struggling to lose 70 pounds. She'd gained 70 pounds in about a year. And it was, she was doing everything. She was getting her hormones checked. She was eating all the right things, quote unquote, of like just the quinoa and the spinach and the vegetables. And she's like, I can't do one more breast of grilled chicken. And and while I wasn't coaching her on health, I was coaching her on her mindset. And I said, let me just ask you, why don't you want to lose the weight? And she's like, what are you talking about? I've spent all this money. I want to lose the weight. And I said, yeah, but if you really did, it could be gone by now. Like, you've been working at this for 6 to 8 months. Like, some progress should have been made technically. And maybe with somebody else could have been made. But so I asked her, I said, why don't you want this this, like if if we were to really dive into it, just play with this question, if we were to remove the ego out of it. And she sat with it and she said, well, I really like wearing stretchy pants. And I said, I mean, hey, I was a Pilates instructor for 10 years. Like I lived in Lululemons. So I love my stretchy pants as well. But that doesn't make me hold on to 70 extra pounds. So what is it like? You can wear stretchy pants, at a healthy weight. You can wear stretchy pants at
That's
overweight.
The first thing I thought of. Yeah.
What else is it? And when we really got down to it, what it was that she was scared of men being attracted to her.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah, I said, is that ultimately true, that men wouldn't be attracted to you? Because she was a very gorgeous girl, like beautiful woman, even with, 70 pounds, she was gorgeous. Mm-hmm. And she's like, no, I still get hit on. And I was like, so it's not ultimately true, but the weight is like, would you say that the weight is protecting you from actually having another relationship? Or how is the weight serving you? And when we got down to it, she realized that it was like holding on to that extra weight was actually her form of not getting into another emotionally abusive relationship that she had been in the past.
Wow.
So she was bringing in that past into her future. And once she addressed that, she actually started to get real results. And she actually started to have change that happened. But she had to look into the belly of the beast at the root of what it was that was preventing her from getting the results that she wanted.
Got to have a little look under the old hood.
Yeah, you got to have a look under the old hood, and you got to be willing to check your ego. Because asking a question like that, and I ask this question of my business clients as well. When I ask them, like, so why aren't you making more money? And they're like, hey, hold up. And I say, if we check the ego, like, what is it? Why aren't you making more money? Like, let's come up with the reasons. Because why is a great question to get to all the reasons, to get to all the excuses, and to get to all the limiting beliefs. It's not really a great question to move you forward into a different strategy. But if you want to assess and like find and discover what a limiting belief is, and you're able to look outside yourself instead of being like, well, it's because I'm a failure. It's, and having one of those, then it's, that could be the root of the problem, is that you believe that you're a failure, and therein lies a limiting belief.
Exactly.
So, I had one of my clients who had been very successful, but he constantly saw himself as a failure. And I said, well, let's look at this. So in your bio, like, that doesn't sound like a failure at all. Like, you sound like a freaking entrepreneurial rock star. So I said, the problem is you're seeing the lower half of the graph. You're seeing all the dips, all the challenges, because you experience them. Versus the rest of the world is seeing all the ups and all the highs and all the championships and all the big successes. I said, the problem is neither you or the rest of the world is looking at the entirety of the graph. And he was like, what? And I said, because there is a through line of that graph that is one line right on the fold between the successes and the failures, and that is your grit. That is your resilience. So it's not that you're a failure because you've had success. You can't say that you're a failure because you've had success. Like, if you've had any form of success, no matter what it is, if you were able to successfully wake up today, that's a success. Like, it depends on how you define what a success is.
It sounds like the gal that wanted to lose weight, she probably developed that belief in maybe young adulthood. But it sounds like this guy that you're referring to, this business guy, and I'm assuming this is some clients in your high performance consulting practice, your private one-on-one stuff. So it sounds like this guy is like a lot of people. And that is, those beliefs about those labels about who I am and how I fit into the world are defined in childhood.
Oh, yeah.
That belief could have come from kindergarten when he was age 5 or 6 or 7. And now he's taken this false belief about who he is into adulthood, and his past is interfering with his present.
And the great part is that it motivated him to achieve a lot of successes. And that's it circles back to what I was saying about driving forward, looking in the rearview mirror, is that it is a great short-term strategy for success.
Yeah.
Like, fear can be a fantastic motivator to get your booty into gear and go for it. But it's not a long-term strategy for high performance and continued success.
Yes. Absolutely. So when you're doing a consulting, this 101, we talked about limiting beliefs. What other common problems do you see people that are limiting their breakthroughs, keeping them from becoming all the men and women that they're created to be?
The identity is a big one. So the beliefs of meaning that you strap onto an identity. I am a failure. I mean, if I was living by the old definition of who I was back, when I was 15 years old and bulimic, I am bulimic. Like, I stopped calling myself bulimic simply because I recognized that the identity, my soul, my spirit was not bulimic. My actions were. So separating the actions that you're doing from your identity is first and foremost. The results that you get, because so often we'll easily tie our results to our identity. So success is a big one, especially for men that I've worked with, where they've had unsuccessful results and thus they define themselves as not a success. Yeah. And I'm like, that doesn't necessarily ring true. What may need to change is your own personal meaning that you've attributed to what is success.
Right. I may have failed at XYZ, but that doesn't make me a failure.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And really assessing the language around how you're communicating about your identity. So checking especially the beliefs of identity, the beliefs of how you define yourself to be. One of my favorite verses of the Bible is when God announces himself to Moses, and he's like, I am that I am. Mm-hmm. And I am are the most powerful words we can ever utter about ourselves. Like that, those are the most powerful words. Mm-hmm. And if we are spirit and our body has a soul, then that spirit is not a failure. Then that spirit is connected to God.
Absolutely.
So by defining ourselves as a failure, by defining ourselves as flawed or broken, like that was my big identity shift. Was I used to believe I was broken, and I just thought I was broken, and I thought I was damaged, and I thought I was a victim of all of the circumstances that I grew up with. And because I thought those things, I recreated situations of victimization in my early adulthood. And because I thought those beliefs, I put myself in dangerous situations that allowed me to break myself a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And then it was through teaching and through learning and through observing and through my own curiosity, which is why I love the word curiosity. Because I do believe that curiosity is kind of, it's those little intuitive spiritual nudges to like, go for this, look at this, assess this. And those little nudges, I've always had a deep connection with just following those. Like, I don't know what it is, but that's always been very similar. So I would follow that curiosity. And I came to realize that it wasn't that I was broken. It was that the belief that I was broken was 100% plagiarized. Mm-hmm. And so we all have these types of plagiarized programming in us where we've adopted somebody else's belief of themselves as our own and claimed it. But it's not. That's a false belief because it's not in alignment with what is ultimately true, which is love.
That's a great word. I believe I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and I believe we're made in God's image. And we all have that longing inside to be a part of something greater than ourselves. And it does help when you're talking about your sense of identity. I have another question for you. I want to go back and revisit the gal that was trying to lose the weight.
Yeah, you got it.
Basically, what you told her was, look, you've got to decide. It doesn't look to me like you've really decided to lose the weight yet, because if you had, 7 months' time, we'd see some progress. Mm-hmm. So I want to tie that in with something I heard you talk about on a recent podcast, was you had made the decision to have the birth of your baby at home with a midwife as opposed to the hospital. Mm-hmm. Now, that was pretty major decision. So talk to me about talk to the HHM community, the audience, about what that decision-making process was like for you.
Yeah. So I had my son at a birthing center, so I didn't have him at home. My next one, my one that's on the way, she'll be at home. And for me, everybody has their own unique way of making a decision. Sometimes it's you hear something or you see something or you need to research something. For me, I'd followed my curiosity to looking at the traditional way of that current society has given birth. Like, we've been giving birth at home for many, many years before.
How many centuries?
But the current way. And I looked at the current model and I saw exactly what I didn't want. So I went in and I went to the great hospital in Los Angeles, where I thought, okay, this is going to be a great hospital, a great OB-GYN. And one of the things that she said to me just turned me off so powerfully. She's like, oh, if you're thinking of getting pregnant, you have to stop eating sushi now and stop drinking wine. I was like, all that I know. And I said, but what about coffee? She said, well, actually, according to the American Pediatric Association, you can have 250 milligrams of caffeine a day. Little did I know that when I'm in my first trimester, like, there is no craving coffee whatsoever. It's one of the few smells that I can't even stand.
Okay.
But she said, so she followed it up with, so you could have 2 Diet Cokes a day. And I said, oh, wait, what? That is a chemical. That is nothing nutritious whatsoever in it. And
Right.
I would put that into my body, but a sip of red wine would destroy my child.
Oh, forget it. Yeah.
I'm like, that's, whoa, hold up. Like, it just didn't make sense. So I saw that, and what's great is when you realize what you don't want, so long as you don't focus on what you don't want, it's a really great guidepost to what it is that you want. So immediately I saw what I didn't want. And I also didn't like the fact that if I'd, worked with this doctor which is like many hospitals, worked with this doctor for 9 months, and then suddenly, like, the big game time comes, then she might not be my doctor and I might get some dude. That did not make me feel comfortable whatsoever. Like, that, like, not that I have a problem with dudes, but just having some of the experiences that I had in my past, I wanted to be surrounded by females, especially in that very vulnerable position.
Totally get it.
And so I said, okay, that's what I don't want. So what was great was I just believe that God opens so many doors. Like, and I was blessed with a client, a Pilates client, who was formerly a midwife. And she just would share with me different things and different bits of information. The beautiful thing that I liked about the midwives is that there's no pressure to choose one way or the other. There's unlike what I found with traditional medical doctors, where I'd felt pressured that I had to do something that way, or else I was wrong, or else I was making a bad choice, or else I was being foolish. With midwives, I felt like I had options. And that's just something that, for me in my own decision-making process, that was something that I like to have. I'd like to have a couple options. I like to make my own choices and have ownership of the choice that I make.
Well, let me interrupt you right there. That sounds a little bit like you've kind of hit the nail on the head on what your why was. You wanted to have more control. You wanted to have more say in the process, as opposed to surrendering to the hospital policy and the doctor's orders. So that was your why. In my book, The Christian's Guide to Holistic Health, I have a chapter in there on mindset, and I quote Michael Hyatt, the blogger and self-help guru. Yeah, he's great. And one of the things he's fond of saying is, you lose your way when you lose your why. Mm-hmm. So you've got to get in touch with your why. If you want to accomplish a goal, you want to accomplish something great, you've got to have a reason why you want to do that. And it sounds like that was your why. It sounds like you wanted to be not in control, but have more say in the matter.
Ownership. Like, ownership is a primary value of mine, considering and that's just a testament to how you can radically change your identity. Because I used to have an identity of absolute opposite of ownership, where I was a victim, and I operated from that very victim mindset where everything happened to me, and I blamed everyone and every other thing for things that happened in my life.
So
versus
common.
It's so common. So it's not that it's bad. It's just that it will not serve to really move you forward. So you can have your excuses, or you can have momentum. It's really just up to you. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I started to see life as, instead of everything happening to me, as everything happening for me. And so even with that situation, with that OBGYN, I was just like, okay, this happened for me for a reason, to see exactly what I don't want. So let me seek out some other alternatives.
Well, I think knowing what you don't want can be a very powerful motivator, but it's a little bit like that rearview mirror thing.
Yes.
It's not the ideal motivator.
Well, you can't drive looking forward at it. So many people are looking back at all the things they don't want. They don't want to be like their parents. They don't want to be angry. They don't want to be a failure. So they're driving forward, looking in that rearview mirror, versus if you see things that you don't want, it's like driving forward, but it's like those little checks behind you of just like, oh, is that car a little too close? Oh, yep. Okay, cool. Let me just move out of the way. And then you get back to the vision. So you constantly are going back to forward-facing vision, toward faith in what you would love to create in your life, and be able to have that. And that is what really moving forward that I see in faith is like. It's like you have those little check-ins of like, let me just check the rearview mirror, but it's not constantly like, because you do want to check your mirrors while you're on the freeway. Sure. It's been a minute since I've driven a car, but while being over here in Australia, but I can remember driving in the freeway in Los Angeles. And so that experience really taught me that I did value personal ownership. Yeah. And that I wanted to own my experience. And the more I researched the benefits of a natural vaginal birth, that made me very, very gun shy of going to a hospital that has a very high C-section rate for these emergency C-sections that I just question.
Yeah.
Like, it just made me skeptical.
We could do a whole podcast on that, but that's, a lot of that is defensive medicine. It's the safer way for the doctor to go protect himself against a lawsuit and all that. Yeah. But we all know God's design is best. And the healthiest way to have a baby for mom and baby is the traditional, natural way. Yeah.
And so I knew, and there was something in my gut that just knew that that's what I wanted. And so while, as soon as I made that decision, and here's the thing about making big decisions, and when you make them with 100% certainty, this is why I say that when you can find where certainty and trust live in your body, because your body is run by your subconscious mind. We have this beautiful subconscious mind that is beating our heart, breathing our lungs, circulating our blood, and doing all these things that we're not even thinking about right now. Mm-hmm. So because our subconscious minds are so beautiful and so powerful, and they're operating 95 to 97% of our programming, like that's why I get to town on the subconscious mind and on beliefs, because that really is huge. And so when you can find where certainty and trust live in your body, where you actually feel certainty and trust, some people feel it in their hearts, some people feel it in their gut or in their solar plexus or in their womb. But when you find where it feels for you and you make a decision from there, it changes the game for how you are making decisions. So instead of like, I know that if I'm making a decision from my solar plexus, then that's a decision that's very much in alignment with my highest and best self, with growth, with God, that's like something that I feel is me leaning into my curiosity, me leaning into something that may feel unknown, because our brains can't tell the difference between fear and excitement. Like fear and excitement register both in the hypothalamus and the brain. So it's like our brains cannot tell the difference, but our bodies do. Our bodies can. And so when you can find that certainty and trust and make those decisions from that space, it changes the game. Versus I know that if I'm making decisions from like, if I'm feeling anxious, if I'm feeling like I'm making a decision and my lungs and I'm having trouble breathing and I'm struggling with in my throat and in my shoulders and in my upper respiratory area, that is a decision that I'm making from fear. So knowing where fear and certainty both live in your body.
Well, that gets back to what I was talking about earlier about the three parts of a human being that can't be separated. I just want to go through, there's another part to that, which is the hierarchy. Let me briefly go through this real quick, and we'll just kind of have to wrap things up. But our spirit is the highest and most noble part of our being, and it's designed to be connected to and in submission to God. And when we do that, our spirit will send healthy instructions to our minds, and our minds will be submitted to God, and our minds will send healthy instructions to our brains,
and our brains run our bodies. So that gets into what you were just talking about, a minute ago, about how your unhealthy thoughts can produce unhealthy outcomes in your body, and good thoughts will produce better outcomes in your body. It's all interconnected. We can't separate the three.
And I love that you called it the hierarchy of the brain taking direction from spirit, or sometimes it gets a little rebellious and our egos get
Sure.
get in the way.
A lot of balance there,
and want to rebel against those higher things, because the ego will want to say, this is crazy. Why would you do this? And I get those. Like, that's exactly what happens every time I make a very solid, strong decision. Is typically there are people around me that will highlight the reflection of my ego, because perception is projection. That will highlight the reflection of my egos with suddenly being very, very vocal and very, very loud about how that's the most foolish decision, how I'm crazy, how it's reckless, how da-da-da-da, and all the things. And I'm like, oh, cool. Thank you. Thank you for that unsolicited advice, because especially from who it's coming from, I look at their life and their results and how they live. And I ask myself, is that how I would like to be in the world? And typically it is not.
Kimberly, that's a great word. And I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and dropping all those value bombs on us. Before I let you go, and I have one more question for you. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
The best way is just to go to my website at crownyourself.com. And if you love this episode and you'd like to go to town on your subconscious mind, I'd love to have a high performance acceleration consult with you.
Excellent. So, yeah, I've been to your website. It's a really good website. It flows very well. It's a great site. So last question I have for you is, you're an author, and your most recent book is called Mindful Meals: How to Dethrone Fears and Reign in a Body That Rules. I love the title. So who did you write that book for, and what are the highlights?
I wrote that book for myself, but that book really, I ended up writing it for a girl named Michaela. And I was struggling with getting the book out, and it's to be released. But I was struggling with the writing process, and I was on the phone with my coach. And this is how God just puts the most amazing people in your path when you're open to it and aware and share vulnerably and openly. And I was sharing of how I was having struggles with finishing this. And she said, Kim, I'm going to tell you something that I don't normally tell most clients. And I said, what is that? And she said, literally last week before we got on a coaching call, said, my daughter just came out to me saying that she was struggling with an eating disorder. And she goes, I've coached people who've gone through eating disorders. She goes, but there is something different when it's your child. And especially as a mom, I know from my own experience is that when something is quote unquote wrong or challenging, or something's going up with your kid, there is a feeling of, what did I do wrong? How did I mess this up? There is the guilt and shame that go along with it. And you can't coach from that place. And she said, she said, I can't help her from that space, from the space of a coach where I would normally help other people. She said, because I'm too tied, I'm too involved in it. She goes, but you can. She goes, because I don't know what it's like also to not love your body. She's like, that's just not how I grew up. She's like, I don't know what it's like to have these thoughts and these feelings, but you do. She goes, I need you to write this book for my daughter. And so that is why the book is coming out, and I am very excited for it. I think we actually may be changing the title, and that's something that I just recently decided, because a lot of people were asking me, is it a recipe book? Is it like a eat this, not that sort of thing? And I'm like, that's the last thing that it is.
Yeah.
Nobody needs another one of those books.
I didn't take it that way at all.
The title is going to be changed to Rule Your Body. Rule Your Body: How to Dethrone Food Fears and Reign in a Body That Rules.
Excellent. So, and when do you think it's going to be coming out?
So that will be coming out in June.
That would be June of 2021.
Yeah. Our release date got pushed, but I am very, very excited that it is finally going to be seeing the light of day, and that it will be serving, because I do think, especially with this pandemic, the tools, even if you haven't had a lot of body stuff, that the tools for shifting beliefs and for cleansing the palace and for honoring the holistic being that is this beautiful vessel that we have been gifted, this temple, this palace.
Body is the temple of the Holy Spirit.
We need to honor that and keep the palace clean for the spirit to really thrive.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Kimberly. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, David. It has been a pleasure.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Kimberly Spencer. She's a wealth of information. She understands a lot about holistic health, and she's just got a great energy. I really enjoyed that conversation. Her website, once again, is crownyourself.com, and her podcast, if you want to check that out, is called The Princess and the Bee. This episode was brought to you by Sauna Space. If you're ready to take your health to the next level by implementing sauna therapy into your health building regimen, go to my resources page at davidsandstrom.com/resources and click on the Sauna Space logo. Ratings and reviews help the show get noticed by more people, so I would appreciate it if you'd head on over to Apple Podcast and leave a rating and review there. If you have any trouble finding that, you can always go to my website and go to the podcasting page. I've got a link there that'll take you to the Apple Podcast preview page, and that's where you can leave a review. Thank you again for listening. I appreciate you giving me some of your valuable time this week. I enjoyed serving you, and I'll talk with you next week. Be blessed.